The story of Chicago is, in many ways, defined by a single date, October 8th, 1871. At about 8:30 p.m. that evening, a small fire began burning in the O'Leary family's barn just southwest of downtown. Fueled by drought conditions in a city predominantly built of highly combustible materials, it would go on to burn down some 2,000 acres and 17,500 buildings. In the aftermath, the core of the city was left completely obliterated. But Chicago rebuilt. Powered by new technologies such as the elevator and steel frame construction, a new form of tall building began to rise above the plains. Designed by William LeBaron Jenney and completed in 1885, the now demolished Home Insurance Building became the world's first skyscraper. Within a few years, this rapidly evolving technology would come to define Chicago's skyline and shape the city's future.
Hi, my name's Emily. I'm a former professional Chicago tour guide, and today I'm here with my friend Jake. We're going to show you some interesting early skyscrapers around the Chicago Loop, including some ones that you might not normally see on tours.
Hello, I'm Jake C. Ruff. I'm a master's candidate for architectural history here in Chicago, and today I'm out front the auditorium building by Louis Sullivan and Dankmar Adler. This is, in many ways, the building that really made Chicago. Prior to this building, Chicago was seen as a dirty industrial town, but this was able to prove that we could become the Paris on the Prairie and bring about the World's Fair, which changed everything and really brought Chicago to the global stage. But of course, before the World's Fair, there were a lot of concerns about if Chicago could actually pull it off. So the wealthiest folks at the time pooled their money together with the mission of creating a democratic space for people to enjoy high art and opera, like in Europe, but for everyone. So they were running a bit behind schedule because it was such a huge undertaking when the 1888 Republican National Convention came around, which was supposed to be hosted in here so that way they could convince the likely next candidate, Benjamin Harrison, to host the World's Fair here in Chicago. Nevertheless, they pressed on, and despite not having a roof, they hosted the Republican National Convention inside the unfinished auditorium. And it was still a wonderful success. Benjamin Harrison became the candidate, wound up becoming president, and mandated that the World's Fair be held here in 1892. Now, this building was a behemoth when it was built. It was bigger than anything people had seen around, and it was set to be the tallest building in the country. Now, when they were designing the auditorium, there was a new technology playing around with the levels of the stages, so the stage could actually move with the performers. This is a brand new technology going on in Europe, so Dankmar Adler, the key structural engineer, went to Europe to investigate that. While he was over there, a new building was designed in New York City that was going to be taller than this building. So the owners of the building went to the architect, Louis Sullivan, who was not a structural engineer, and said, hey, we need to make this taller. We need another floor so we could be the tallest when we open. And he said, absolutely, sure. But he didn't know how to do the calculations. So he added the extra floor, but that threw off the whole weight of the building. There's a floating platform underneath, a floating foundation, which means that the building, it's similar to a ship. It floats on the very moist mud under here because Chicago is built on a swamp. But by adding that extra floor, it tipped the scales and meant that this side of the building, the south side of the building, has sunk 36 inches more than the other side of the building. So now the entire thing's leaning. It got so bad that it was slated for demolition. It was used temporarily during World War II as part of the USO for dormitories. And then afterwards it was bought by Roosevelt University with the intention of tearing it down and building a parking lot. But thankfully, a group of advocates got together and they were able to save it and restore the building, and it's now home to Roosevelt University and still continues to have performances to this day at the Auditorium Theater. The race to the sky continued. Using typical construction methods of load-bearing walls, you could press higher and higher, but you needed to build those walls wider and wider. Like here, at the Monadnock building, which was so heavy it sunk over 4 feet after its construction. But all this was planned and it sunk evenly. Nevertheless, if they wanted to build higher, they were going to have to change things, because this was not economical. Something had to change, and the great innovation was with the steel frame. Now, this was not the first building to use a steel frame, but it is the oldest still standing, and it was the second building here in Chicago to use it. Now, this is a hybrid building, meaning that these thick walls on the outside do still carry load, like it did at the Monadnock. But unlike the Monadnock, all the walls on the inside are movable. They are purely there to divide spaces rather than hold up the building by using a steel frame modeled on a bird cage, freeing up the inside of the building for wider offices, more fresh air and natural light, and moving those loads to the exterior walls and the interior columns. This was supposed to be fully steel frame, but a lot of the folks didn't trust it, so they still made this very fortress-like, so it would look sturdy and rigid, while still respecting the architectural traditions of the time. And just as an aside, we can have our historic character and be sustainable for the environment. This is actually the oldest LEED certified building in the world, predominantly due to the way that it was designed with a central light courtyard, bringing fresh air and ventilation through the center of the building, not to mention some really good insulation. Beyond just being a technological advancement, this was also a very well-designed building, prioritizing office needs of the time and bringing the light and fresh air to the center of the building through this central courtyard, which is just above us right here. This was always the grand lobby, but it has changed over the years. This is actually the third iteration, based predominantly on an iteration from 1905 from the studio of Frank Lloyd Wright. He came in and, with his studio, redesigned the original Burnham lobby to be more light and have gold features and feel more regal when you were coming in. Though elements like these flower pots designed by Marion Mahoney Griffin are very, very clearly reminiscent of the Prairie School throughout this lobby, there are a lot of elements that still remain from the original Burnham design, such as this grand staircase, which leads up through the light court and connects all the floors. Additionally, right over here, concealed within these new ornamental features, the original columns remain.
The Rookery building was such a success that the designers of the Monadnock building decided to abandon their previous plans and instead use their designs to complete the back half of the Monadnock, creating an interesting looking seam here between the old and new sections. You can even see the difference in wall thickness up close. Interestingly enough, you cannot tell that there's any kind of difference when you're in the interior of the structure.
So just a fun thing with the management of this building, they're very selective on who they lease to. So only businesses that could have existed when this building was first built are here. So you have a hat shop, a florist, a barber, but it's all in this old-timey style, so when you walk in here, it feels like you're going back in time.
As the 20th century approached, towers such as the Chicago, Reliance, and my personal favorite, Fisher buildings began to define a new style of architecture known as the Chicago School. Taking inspiration from earlier towers, such as the Monadnock, they featured large bay windows in a style known as the Chicago window, with one large central immovable portion flanked by two movable portions to let in maximum light and air. These were usually arranged in bays that protruded out over the street. The towers feature neoclassical elements and breathtaking terracotta work. As the 20th century began, towers began rapidly evolving towards new forms such as Art Deco. Join us next time on An Architectural History of Chicago as we explore how skyscrapers soared to new heights in the 1920s.